Thank you for that. I mean, Totti, there's certainly no shortage of things we can be talking about. Laurence, Totti mentioned the whole of society, and it feels that it is integrated, it is inclusive, it is egalitarian. With all of those nice words we got. You developed the whole of society approach, and your strapline is everything is connected. I imagine that there's a natural segue from that to that. You want to just maybe comment on some of the things that Totti has spoken about, and maybe take the conversation to the next level, which will be, and in the UK, etc., etc.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this and for inviting me, and thank you, everybody, for joining. So, sauna diplomacy, Totti, I can absolutely vouch for that, because I worked a while back in a Horizon 2020 project with some of your colleagues at the Police College, and I can absolutely confirm that we did discuss some tricky issues in the sauna, followed by a dip in midwinter in one of your lakes. And it does bring one down to a level playing field. So definitely. Look, thanks for that. And I've been involved in one way, shape or form in risk and resilience for a very long time. I ran research and innovation for Serco for the best part of 12 years. And that involved many aspects of critical infrastructure resilience, around space, around community policing, around intelligence, and so on. So I encountered and worked with many Scandinavian Nordic institutions and organizations. And I think one of the fundamental things which stood out of those Nordic countries and your approach is one of size. There's a huge difference in your 5.6 million population versus the size of the UK. But also in the UK, when we've been involved in resilience projects and risk, whether it's for critical infrastructure or counterterrorism and so on, the UK and our institutions and society has lost or forgotten that that sort of living on the edge, which you in Finland are right on the Russian border, firstly. So there is a constant focus of the threat. You also have quite severe differences in weather that you experience, and the hardships being, part of your country being inside the Arctic Circle, and the adverse conditions that brings. Also, apart from maybe cities like Tampere and Helsinki and others, a lot of your country is very remote. So there is an inherent and inbuilt resilience and stoicness within Finnish society, which, if you think back to the UK, the last real time, apart from, very focused issues and our version of weather, severe weather, is nothing like the weather you experience. We may be upset when it floods and a bit of wind and a bit of sun for a few days of the year. But what we experience in the UK in terms of that adversarial conditions, whether it be from our neighbours or from the climate and so on, is very, very different. And I fundamentally believe that the UK as a society hasn't faced for a very, very long time the conditions and the environment which makes us resilient as a people. And of course, our institutions and our organizations are, from top-down government right the way through to the local institutions and organizations, whether they're voluntary organizations or government, public sector, and so on. As an old established society, our bureaucracy is literally that, is bureaucratic, and it's entrenched in how we go about things and so on. So it's very, very difficult for us as an organization to, especially with the size of our population and the number of institutions, to try and reflect how you're doing things. And I remember, and so my background was with Serco for a long time, and I remember, and I see some colleagues from Serco on the call and others involved. I remember in the Emergency Planning College, when I was involved in successful bid for that, working with one of the first directors of the Civil Contingency Secretariat, Bruce Mann, who, and I always remember, he said, resilience should be done by the people, not to the people. So that, you know, that whole ethos that you have in Finland about the whole of society approach, well, actually, it's been part of the conversation here in the UK for a very, very long time. And I also remember, and I see other colleagues who I worked with when someone from Jenny from RUSI on the call, when we produced a paper called Combined Effect, which was a consequence approach to resilience, where we were looking at these same issues. And this was back in 2010, 2011. And to be frank, the conversation in the UK about how we approach resilience, how we break down borders and boundaries, and how we adopt, you know, that comprehensive understanding of societal resilience, that conversation actually hasn't changed for 15 years. The technology has changed, the approaches, the institutions have changed, but the fundamental structural problem and challenges that we in the UK face are entrenched. And one of the whole reasons for whole system approach and combined effect and those various different ways of spinning it is one about, you know, you can't do it top down. Government has a role to set the framework, of course, you know, whether it be various directives, Civil Contingencies Act, as was the new structures of the Resilience Academy, and so on. So government has a role to set the framework for resilience to be a success. But whilst the organizations and the bureaucracies of state, from government departments right the way through down to the local sector, public sector organizations, whilst they remain in their siloed operations, it is virtually impossible to move, to transition towards what you have in Finland. And the only way really is where you have big programs or big challenges to face. And you know, there's no shortage of big challenges that we all face, whether in this country or elsewhere. But you have to treat it in a way where there's a shared vision and a shared purpose. That's the first thing. So from the very top of government right the way through to the people on the street, you have to have a shared vision of the purpose and why you're doing it. And you also have to have a shared understanding of risk, because there's no shortage of interoperability and there's no shortage of a whole of society approach at the grassroots. You know, the fire and rescue services, the local authorities, the voluntary sector, the citizens who are always first on the scene, you know, they're always there, and their interoperability to do things is superb. But once you step back, once commanders and those with a level of authority then start to come into the scene, and of course it has to happen, you have bronze, silver, gold commanders and so on, but once that happens, they then become entrenched in their governance structures, their appetite for risk, the politics. So the higher up the command chain you become, you're not then making decisions which are for the outcomes you need on the ground. You're making decisions which are flavored by politics and by governance, your risk appetite, your organizational governance and process and funding and training. So that interoperability, which ultimately is what we're talking about from a whole of society approach, that interoperability becomes virtually impossible to deliver on the ground, but also from an outcome perspective. So I guess where I'm going is that where you have big, complex societal challenges which need to be addressed, you have to step outside of business as usual. And you have to step outside and remove those borders and boundaries and think about it from the outcomes you want collectively and a shared approach. And then when you've done that, you can then think about how it transitions back into business as usual, so the governance structures and so on. So I know I'm coming up to my time because David has appeared. Thank you for that. But I would say is, it's how we treat research projects in Horizon Europe, for example, where we're trying to go beyond state of the art. We step outside of business as usual. We do our thing. We deliver fantastic outcomes beyond the state of the art. And then we think about transition and integration back into how do we make it work? How do we implement it? And I think, to deliver whole of society resilience, you need to take that approach.